Hello and welcome to Insight. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Hervé JUVIN, a member of the European Parliament and a very successful author. Join us today as we discuss the future of the European Union, a one-of-its-kind institution of the 20th century that may just be in a crisis. Let's talk. Mr. JUVIN, it is so great for us to have you on Insight. Let's start immediately by looking at the European Union. The European Union has been seen by many as a vehicle of peace and prosperity for Europe. But in your opinion, would you say that the supranational cooperation is coming to an end, or is it in a problem, a crisis?
Under the US umbrella, the European Community first, then the European Union, of course, was a force for progress, for peace, and for cooperation. Inside the European Union, the European continent, and also outside. Things are changing. What is it about? The problem is toujours plus d'Europe. The motto of the European institutions is we have to interfere more and more deeply into the national policies of our members. Just let me take an example. Healthcare is a national competency. The European Union institutions and Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, they use the COVID pandemic to interfere with national policies, saying that it's better to do with 25 states what can difficultly be done by each nation. This is the path the European Union and the European institutions are following since the last 20 years. It's very dangerous because at the end of the day, this is the reason why we are facing a surge of nationalism, just because Italian people are not Germans, French people are not Polish people or Hungarians, and we don't want to leave back our identities. And national identities are coming back in Europe.
But do you think also the idea of democracy has changed, as what it was maybe 2 decades, 3 decades ago? Do you think it's more maybe become American in nature, where the rule of law is over and above the will of the people?
The rule of law is too many times the house of lies. I will come back to the definition of democracy, a law and a government from the people, by the people, and for the people. And nowadays, in the European Union, you have this very strange situation where Ursula von der Leyen, an elected person, is threatening Italian voters: if you don't vote in agreement with the European Union statements, I wish punish you. And I have the ways to punish you, as I did for Polish voters or Hungarian voters, because I didn't agree with their votes, and I can punish them. For me, this is totally anti-democratic. And for me, we are softly heading the European Union, not the way to deepening our democracies, but to imposing against the will of the people a kind of soft totalitarianism. Because the rule of law is excellent. Of course, democracy needs the rule of law. But at a certain extent, when the rule of law is against the will of the people, the rule of law can go against democracy. And at the moment, the rule of law in the European Union is threatening to put an end to democracy as we know it. Democracy as we know it is the ability of the people to decide their laws, to keep their values, to keep their borders, and to decide themselves of their destiny. And the European Union doesn't want that. The European institutions want to decide our destiny, to decide our laws and so on and so on. So this is a big threat for me. Democracy is at stake in the European Union at the moment. And we are heading softly to a soft totalitarianism, very close to what is happening in the US at the moment. The US are a plutocracy because you can buy polls, you can buy elections, and you can buy the power with money. This is not the way, I hope, for our European nations.
Well said, but obviously the characteristics of the European Union is changing. It was, correct me if I'm wrong, based on an economic union. Today, that seems to be under a little bit of a crisis. A lot of people say it's because of the low birth rates, and therefore there is high dependency on immigration. Some parties agree with it, nationalist parties oppose it. But if we look at the statistics, the old age dependency in Europe is set to double by 2080. What is your view on this? Is immigration a solution?
My view is clear and simple. The first thing is amazing for me in India, so many young people. So many young girls and boys everywhere in the street, at schools, in the museums, and so on and so on. And in European countries, so many older people. So I entirely agree with you. Life expectancy in European Union is now about 84, 85 years old. And you have very, very few young people of European origin. So this is to say two or three things. First of all, European Union was built to deliver progress and economic progress and good life for many Europeans. And we are at the end of that. Life is coming to be difficult for a lot of Europeans, especially for our German friends. Second, I agree with you with the problem of mass migration. The problem is we have to manage very carefully who is entering Europe, and we have to manage very carefully is the culture, religious faith, and original civilization very compatible with our European values, our European faces, and way of life. And obviously, from people, especially from Muslim origins, the answer is not so easy. So, on third point, we are heading to massive problems with mass migration. We have to take back control of our borders. We have to take back control of our who can stay on our territories, who can benefit from our healthcare systems, and who has to go back to his own country, the country of his origins. This is a great deal of political action to take, but maybe this is a major issue the European Union is facing now.
So let me come to my next question. Like you said, the European Union might face a big issue with immigration, and especially with integration of this immigrant population. Education is usually seen as a vehicle of integration. Do you think it has had an impact on the immigration population, especially the Muslim immigrants?
I'm afraid this is an old idea. It's a very friendly idea. Give them schools, give them universities, give them good training courses, and they will behave accordingly to your values and laws. But it doesn't work that way. We learned a lot about the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, just have a look at the pilots of September 11. Many of them are engineers, many of them have very good training, very good professional background, and they are terrorists. So the European Union facing this uncomfortable truth, this is not a question of education, because a lot of radicalists, a lot of people playing very aggressive role against the European Union from the inside have had good university training, good professional course, and so on and so on. So definitely, education alone is not an answer to the radicalization problem.
So, would you say that the leftist ideology that exists in Europe, has that played a balancing factor, or has that played a factor where it's encouraged radicalization? Do you think that populism and populist thought is, what people follow today in Europe?
We are facing a very strange situation. In the past, leftist value, it was freedom for women. It was going out in a religious faith. It was going out of determination by civilizations and cultures and so on and so on. So it's so strange to see the mix between leftist radicals and Muslim radicals. And that's so strange. For instance, in France, Elisabeth Badinter, the wife of the former Minister of Justice, Robert Badinter, is taking very strong positions against this contre-nature mix between leftist and Muslim movements. So, nationalism is not only the answer to that. Nationalism is in a surge everywhere in Europe at the moment, and nationalism is mainly about we want to take back control. We are not against Muslim people. We are not against, but we want to take back control. This is the way English voters have chosen Brexit. And this is the way Swedish voters, Italian voters, Hungarian people, Polish people, and so on, they want to take back control. We can't afford European Union mixing with everything and deciding for us what is the path of our lives. We want to decide our daily lives. We want to decide our destiny and our laws. And this is the major political point at stake in the European Union at the moment. Of course, we agree to share some cooperation, some agreements. Of course, we agree to share some competencies at the European level, but we want to come back to this great word of subsidiarity. What can be made at a local or regional level must be placed at a local or regional level. With Andrea Cotarac, we created the localist movement, and localist movement is a political movement that said all can be done at the local level must be done at this local level. And this is a very powerful political move at the moment in Europe, come back to the ground.
Absolutely, and you've spoken quite a bit about this local movement, but you also made this really important point about national identity rising, nation states rising. With the change in the political structure and ideology in countries like Sweden and Italy, would you say that the nation state and national identity has risen and that might endanger the European Union?
I don't think so. First, it's not an ideological move. I can take the example of Sweden. Sweden was maybe the most comfortable and most safe country in the world. And nowadays, in so many cities in Sweden, is far worse than in Bogota, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, even other countries. Because safety is in danger, and because for the average citizens, the daily life comes to be a nightmare. So it's not an ideological move. The nation state has to deliver first safety for its own citizens.
Quite right.
And if you fail to deliver safety for your own citizens, you are no more legitimate. This is a question a lot of governments in Europe are facing at the moment. If they are unable to deliver safety, they are no more legitimate powers. This is one of the major issues the European Union is facing. because with the non-restricted mass migration policy, with the open border policy, nowadays, the European Union and European institutions are a major factor of unsafety and uncomfort for European citizens. This is why a lot of them think we are better to go back to the national borders, because only the nation state and our own government is able to face this mass problem, this enormous problem of unsafety, uncomfort, and the destruction of our civilization.
You're quite right. When you speak about Sweden, areas like Malmö have been widely discussed. But having said that, more often than not, a lot of observers of European politics think that nationalism, or as they term it, right-wing politics, is dominated by the elite, dominated by a different age group. Do you think the youth is supporting these movements?
It's very clear in the last poll in France, for instance, in the presidential election, the election of the National Assembly, a huge majority of very young voters, they have chosen the le Rassemblement National, which is the conservative nationalist party. The older ones, they choose to maintain the power in place, mainly because they fear for their retirement benefits. And they have a kind of trust in the government in place to secure their financial assets and their retirement benefits. But the younger people, in their huge majority, they choose to vote for nationalist and conservative movement. And this is the same way in many, many different European countries. Young people, they are perfectly aware that they are heading for difficult times and that the nation state and national identity are their main assets. My main asset is to be a French citizen. I am proud to be a French citizen. And my main assets are the great cultural and civilizational heritage of France. Maybe it's a little bit the same if I were to be an Indian citizen.
Absolutely. I was thinking about that as you were speaking, that it's similar in India as well. But apart from this, there's also a question of a traditional competition in Europe. The competition, let's say, between France and Germany. Do you think that sort of traditional competitiveness still exists? And if so, what is the impact on the Union?
There is also a certain degree of competition in each nation state, each member of the European Union. But as you know perfectly well, the European Union was based on a friendship between General de Gaulle and Konrad Adenauer in the late 50s and in the 60s, and a lot of friendship declarations from both German and French government. At the moment, it took a very different way, because German economy is facing enormous amount of difficulties. What is it about? Their competitive advantage is very cheap energy coming from Russia, and they use it. For the coming winter, maybe for the years to come, they have no more access to cheap energy coming from Russia. So the industrial basis, very strong industrial basis of Germany, will be unable to deliver. They will be unable to perform, and they will lose their huge place in the global trade. This is not at all the situation of France, because we are not dependent on Russian gas. Less than 5% of energy consumption in France were coming from Russia. So we are not dependent on Russian energy. So this could be a very good opportunity for France to reindustrialize and to rebuild our industries, because we forgot to invest and to develop our industries since the last 2 decades. Maybe there could be a big coming back of industry in France, and I hope that the localist movement is to reindustrialize France, because we need industrialized jobs. They are high salaries, they are good jobs, and we have to re-import jobs. We let them go outside in the world.
So you would say that France is not in the same position
Not at all.
as Germany because of the nuclear plants that you have, and you're not expecting any sort of price increase towards the winters.
Oh yeah, we will have price increases, of course, mainly because of this stupid European energy network. It costs us a lot. But at the end of the day, we have to reform the stupid energy policy of the European Union. And at the end of the day, we are not so much dependent of cheap Russian energy import. So this could be a huge opportunity for France.
Excellent. What is the relationship that you think that Europe today shares with the US?
It's not a very easy question at the moment, because there are a lot of tensions, not at the government levels, because they comply with US laws and with US war, military affairs. In the European populations, things are different. We are different for the US. We are allies. We are highly dependent on the US financial system. A great deal of our level of life is depending on the US dollar supremacy. And this is of very major importance in the conflict with Russia. No European citizens can hope a final victory of Russia, because we are so dependent of the US on the economic and financial matters. But of course, we don't share the same values. We don't share the same civilization. We don't agree with the plutocracy. We don't want to buy elections. We don't want those who have money can intervene in politics and can win elections just because they have money. Let me take an example. 2 years ago, China's president Xi Jinping published a book, China, Democracy That Works. It was very shocking for our US friends and also for a lot of European citizens. But let me say that when some Chinese billionaires are going far away against the People's Republic of China, against the national interest of China, they are going to jail. When a president in the United States is going against plutocrats, for instance, Facebook, Twitter's owners, and so on, they dismiss the president. Where is the democracy?
Quite right. Well said. But, you mentioned, how civilizationally, in terms of values, there is a difference. Recently, I think yesterday, Mr. Putin gave a very historic speech. He also mentioned the difference in civilizational values. He looked at the West, clearly indicating to the US, saying that, maybe they are, the US is trying to colonize our civilization and must recognize that, there is a difference. How do you view President Putin's speech?
Of course, it was a speech of historical importance. President Putin makes 2 or 3 things very clear. The last world order, built after Second World War, was built on mutual respect, legitimacy of power, respect of sovereignty of the nation states, and so on and so on. And at the moment, and Mr. Lavrov made it very clear in his last speech at the United Nations, there is no more respect. The United States and their allies, they don't respect anything stranger to their interests and values. So the US put an end to the old world order. Second, President Putin made it very clear, I will say that with my own words. Till the end of the 90s, till George Bush II, I can consider that the US hyperpower was a power for the good and for peace and for progress. Of course, they made some mistakes, but mainly the US were a force for peace and progress in the world. And this is no more the case. Since the catastrophic and illegal invasion of Iraq, since the destruction of the states of Libya, of Afghanistan, the aggression against Syria, the spoiling of oil and gas in Syria, at the moment, the US and our US allies are a force for chaos and destruction. They are no more a force for progress and civilization. This is the main change for me. We are living biblical terms. We are living the return of the biblical age where it's impossible to have a peace agreement between different national interests. You just have to destroy your competitors and you have to turn ashes to your enemies. And this was for me at the background of this very important speech of President Putin. We are coming back to biblical age, so there is no end, that a fight to the end.
Quite right. But when we look at India, and now turning our attention to India, India took a stance in the Ukraine-Russia conflict and was judged harshly by some. How do you think Europe views India's independent stance?
It's not an easy question for me because, you know, on one hand, many of my European colleagues and my French friends, they see India as yogis, Ganesha, temples, great civilizational heritage, but very old one. And in the other hand, most of them, they know perfectly well that Bangalore is one of the software capitals of the world. So that's very different, and a lot of European citizens and my French friends, it's very difficult for them to join these two different pictures. Let me add that we have in Europe and as well in the US a huge propaganda against India to depict the ruling party, the BJP, and your ruling chief, Mr. Narendra Modi, as strong enemies of minorities, are crushing your Muslim minorities and so on and so on. And as you know perfectly well, a few years ago, Mr. Narendra Modi was not welcome in many countries across European Union. This was the result of huge propaganda against India. I don't know where it comes from, but there is still a huge propaganda against India. So the standalone position in India is very sympathetic to French citizens like me. I want France to come back to a non-aligned position in foreign affairs. So a lot of French citizens have a good friendship with India because of the standalone position and because of our national interest is the only way we can decide and we can manage our foreign relations. As I know, this is the position of India. I hope it could be a position for France with a more independent foreign policy. But at the moment, we share the same threats, not a multipolar world, but a bipolar world with the European Union totally aligned under control of the United States and China aligning all the Asian states. In this case, I don't see exactly what will be the position of India, but of course, behind look east and act east, the major issue is our coming to a multipolar world.
we are very lucky to have friends like you and other French citizens, who are friends of India. But if I was to ask you to compare India's actions and stance in the Ukraine-Russia conflict with the stance that Europe took, the European Union took, would you be able to compare?
European Union has not a very clear idea of its strategic interest. And for me, I deeply regret that at the same time we gave help to Ukraine, we didn't have a strong sense for the return of diplomacy. At the same time we delivered weapons to Ukraine forces, we must have a very strong say in you have to come back to the table of negotiation and you have to come back to the Minsk agreement. The Minsk agreement were excellent, and if President Zelensky have respected them, maybe we won't have this war, because the Minsk agreement managed some kind of freedom for Donetsk and Lugansk on the eastern part of Ukraine. Let me just say, I know quite well Ukraine and the region. Of course, the western part of Ukraine is entirely West European centered, and they want to be a part of Europe. But at the same time, the eastern part of Ukraine is totally oriented to Russia. This is a major issue, and the Minsk agreement have very precise dispositions to manage that very complex situation. So we have to ask strongly for diplomacy to take back control and for a return to the table of negotiation, because at the moment things are not doing good, and I'm afraid we are at just the last step before a third world war.
Well, that spells a grave future, not just for Europe, but for the entire world. But unfortunately, I could discuss this much longer. We are running out of time. So I'll come to my last question. This is your 22nd visit, approximately, to India. You know India really well. European people and Europe may have a different view of India in terms of its social and political parameters. What has your experience been?
A lot of experiences, so it's so difficult to say something about India. You know the job. I spend one day in India, I want to write a book. I spent a few years in India. It's impossible for me to write only one page. Let me say that as a European and a French citizen, it's amazing that India is coming for its 30 Glorieuses. In France, the 30 glorious years have beginning in the 60s under General de Gaulle. And we have had 3 decades of high growth, social progress, social peace, and amazing betterment of life for every French citizen. I think India is at the beginning of the 30 Glorieuses. You are heading for some decades of high growth, a lot of social achievements, and progress for each Indian citizen. This is my feeling in India at the moment. And at the same time, what I respect in India is a sense of limits. What is the major problem with the US is they have no limits. They have no limits in interference. They have no limits in the way they want to manage the world. And they have to limit in the way they want to impose their own national interests everywhere in the world. India knows the value of limits. And for me, the condition for peace in the coming world, the condition for sound cooperation between different nations, different people, and different civilizations is both respect for the differences and respect for each identity, but also we have to know the limits of any human action, any policies, on any power. And this is the way I have great hopes for India and for the role India could play in the coming world, because India has a very clear idea about the limit of human actions.
Well, Mr. JUVIN, thank you so much. And on that positive and hopeful note, I hope to have you again on Insight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rami.
This, of course, was a very insightful discussion with Mr. Hervé JUVIN. The European Union historically came together as a financial union, not as a political union. Once again, with the rise of national identities, it remains to be seen whether this union will last or not. Thank you for watching Insight. Until next time.